Rachel, and I'm your host for the Merry Writer podcast. Unfortunately, Ari couldn't be here today, so she is here in spirit. But I am joined by a very special guest. So this week, we are on episode 258 asking, who is Dr. Marie-Helene Pelletier? Before we start, if you enjoy the show, consider checking out our coffee page. You can follow the page for free as we have plenty of goodies for all. If you're feeling generous, a one-off donation will get you access to a few more treats, or you could become a Merry Writer for $2 a month. For this, you'll get access to all the items in our shop, including exclusive goodies, as well as access to bonus episodes, all while helping to support our podcast. But of course, if that's not your style and you still enjoy the show, then please subscribe wherever you're listening, and if you're not already, and consider dropping us a like on YouTube. Now, I want to give a big warm welcome to Dr. Pelletier, better known as MH. With over 20 years of experience, MH shares what psychologists know, but other professionals and leaders may not, specifically the intersection of high performance and strong workplace mental health. Holding both a Ph.D. and an MBA, she brings a signature mix of business and psychology. Her award-winning book, The Resilience Plan, A Strategic Approach to Optimizing Your Work Performance and Mental Health, which came out in 2024, was named a top 5 book to read by Inc. magazine and Forbes. MH, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It's lovely to meet you.
Rachel, same. Very happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. So we want to get to know a little bit more about you and your book. What inspired you to write The Resilience Plan?
Exactly. Why? It's people I work with who, whether it was audiences or individuals in my coaching work, would say, "Oh, this is so great. I'm so glad I know this work now moving forward." And more, they would say, "I wish I knew this sooner." And heard this a number of times. And of course, loving mental health and optimized performance and wanting everyone to bring their best. I was thinking, well, yeah, if I wrote a book, some people, someone, somewhere would know this sooner, and that would be a good thing. And so, over time, hearing this and letting it sort of incubate for a while, at some point I said, okay, I'm doing this.
What a great reason, especially from the mental health angle, because it's something that we all go through. And especially when it comes to writing, what better way to learn than reading a book? Even if you're not a writer, what better way to learn than reading a book? Having a book where you're able to teach others and share that journey and all the things that you've learned over the years, I think that's wonderful to touch so many lives.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And for me, it was also a very learning experience in terms of, what do you put in the book and how do you think about it? And the people I was working with are fantastic. And they were very much reminding me very often that the book is for someone, not about something. And so what do you need? What do I need in this case to bring in the book to move my reader from point A to point B? And that focus was so helpful, because otherwise, I mean, there are so many fabulously interesting pieces of research, fun things to know, useful things to know, but not that are not specifically related to this, that it kept me very laser focused on where are we going with this? What are we doing? And what needs to be there to help my reader move from point A to point B.
I think that's such an interesting perspective too, because Ari and I, we're both fiction writers, and a lot of our audience are fiction writers. So when it comes to writing nonfiction for anybody, the main purpose is to teach. And where do I go? How do I get from point A to point B? And what do they need to learn? What can I teach them? So that makes an awful lot of sense. I got to ask, how long did it take you to write this book?
Yes, I've been asked that a number of times. And I would say it probably, if I think of the overall process from, okay, I'm going to write a book, to it's now written, and then another year for publication, but probably 4 years. Because for me, in the reality that I learned, it's obvious now that I say this, but I had this idea that people were writing books in addition to whatever else they're doing. And for me, that was not a possibility. And for many people, I suspect, because lives are full already. So it's not like we have this time waiting with fresh brain and availability and the whole thing to write a book. And plus, my area of expertise being at the intersection of psychology and business, and focused on bringing our best and managing the demands and supply, then obviously writing a book became an additional demand, something I wanted to do, a positive demand, but still a demand. And so therefore it needed for me to plan ahead. What am I going to take out of my schedule for the next few years? How can I start preparing, building now, whatever, smaller writing, perhaps collecting some ideas, perhaps whatever was part of my incubation process, such that when I get into the more active writing, I would be warmed up. I needed it to be that like this for myself. I'm always like this. I need that incubation. If you have a question for me, not you here, it's perfect for us to talk. But if I need to think about something important, it immensely helps me if I just figure out the question right now, even if I have no time to work on it, and then let it sit and then do my things, do my life, blah, 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 come back to it whenever, a week later, a month later, it's better. And so that's how I built my process. So I would say about 4 years.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Because something that, I mean, with most writers, a huge complaint about writing is that you never have enough time to do it. So the fact that you mentioned that you took a look at your life and you said, okay, what are some things that I can kind of set aside and put on the back burner so that I can continue on with my daily living, but also continue to work on this book? Because I assume you were working full time during the writing, right?
I had to work a little less. And that's something some people told me after the writing process. They were like, oh, yeah, I made like a percentage less money that year because I was writing the book. And I was like, well, that financial planning could have been part of what I do. So for me, it did modify, yes, how much I was working. I still needed to pay my bills, obviously, and all this. So there was a degree of, would I have liked to, by the time I was ready to write, have more hours a day to do it? Sure. But yes, you do need to, I needed to do paid work. And so that stayed in, but not to the same extent. No, no, no. It had a financial impact.
That is great. I mean, it's funny too. It's great that you were able to find that balance because I'm sure there were times where it was easier than like some days were harder than others, you know. It's not a smooth process writing a book from start to finish.
No, it's a commitment. And it's a, I would not even say, it's funny you said, you found that balance. I'm not even sure I would call it balance actually, because it was a decision. It was what made sense best. Maybe in that sense, it represents a balance, but sometimes balance sounds like you feel good and it's wonderful, like it's great. And, no, my actual wish would have been that days have more like 34 hours. So I would have had an extra 10 hours a day. So that would have been a nice balance. I would have fitted in more of the things I want in a balance that I would have liked. Whereas being, a normal human in the normal time frame, it mostly felt like concessions, making decisions based, okay, now my shift in professional values has happened. I really want to make space for this, so I'm going to make it. And there are other things I love that right now I will do less of because I want to prioritize this project. So it was a bit of a discipline thing.
Yes, discipline. That I mean, that's the main keyword here. It's so difficult to do that, especially depending on where your priorities lie. And there are many people out there who they say, I want to write a book and they do it as a hobby, and that's great. And they work on it in their free time. But then you have other people like you where you made the time because time is an enemy to all of us. If I could have 34 hours in a day, I would jump on that in a heartbeat.
Right?
But during this time, what exactly was your writing process like?
So I decided to work with a developmental editor. So that involved some learning moments, some focused writing moments, some guidance about my early drafts. And turns out that also connected me with a community of writer, which I was not even thinking about initially, not realizing, oh my God, all these people are writing and existing and supporting each other. And I initially assumed it would be a very solitary activity. It is to some degree, of course, and there is a wonderful community, and that discovery was almost like worth writing a book on its own. Seriously, it was so amazing. Continues to be like, even say this conversation, you and I talking, would not have happened if I did not write a book. And now it does, and it's great. So yeah, so working with outside supports, outside structure, um, and for me, I literally in planning the time I needed to protect for the writing, it was about uh, being a morning person. For sure, it had to be in the morning, but then other very important writing or work needed to happen in the morning that now needed to be pushed. Planning in advance. How many hours am I going to need to write a book that's about 40,000 words? Okay, what's, literally getting into almost like the math of it to some degree so that I could keep track. I could write in different contexts in different ways, maintain the pace. I was very committed to uh, getting to getting the book done and publishing, in part because it connects with other areas of my work. It allows the message that I share in my speaking and coaching work to stay longer, to extend also to just different ways of incorporating information. So I had many motivations to create that planning, that schedule, and stay decently committed to it.
You sound like you jumped into this project way better than I jump into my own novels. Oh, when did you get the developmental editor? Did you have this idea and then you just like did you have the first draft written and then you decided to move on, or did you just start with it?
I just started with it. I had nothing, no book written. I had written earlier in my career academic articles, industry articles for newsletters. I had written small blogs for my website. And then I had written emails like everybody else, but literally, like seriously, it wasn't more than this. But being I think in general, I tend to do things a bit this way. Having been in management roles where you have project plans, you have strategies, you have all these ways of planning how you're going to do things. And I love learning, but I love sometimes elements of exploration. And I like exploration within a certain frame that gives me something to think about or to focus on or to learn, or I'm just a bit like that. And so that's how I approach it. I think that's just that. So I thought there's no way I'm going to start writing a book on my own with nothing around me. I'm going to feel like I'm in a black hole. Like even, I mean, my closest approximation to writing something that significant was my doctoral research over 20 years ago. And even then, I mean, you do find yourself in a black hole because you're doing original research and you're doing the whole piece of work, really. But you do have a thesis supervisor, you have a committee, you've got, different features, people around you that are providing some guidance. And it just felt like I needed to recreate a bit of that around me for this. So for me, that's how I got to thinking of it this way.
That's so interesting because normally, I mean, you'd start a book and you go with it and you learn as you go along, but I never really thought to have that community and that support around me aside from, like my sister's a writer and of course I have Ari, but and we have our own little writing community, but I never thought to like go deep into like the experts of the industry to help me write my book. I did join a local writers community or writing group years ago, and I made friends that way, but I never really thought to just get an editor right out the bat. What a good idea.
I know. Seriously, I loved it so much. And the person I worked with, her name is AJ Harper. She wrote a book about writing books. She called it Write a Must Read. It was published in the past couple of years. But that's what she does. And she does have fiction, nonfiction people in that, which is also fascinating for me, right? Because I'm learning everything about nonfiction. I already know nothing about anything in this area. And then I've got these fiction people in there. I've had people writing memoirs. I've got like, so that was extremely inspiring. And I told her and I've told other people, it turned out this overall because I took a workshop that she's doing over a number of months that helps the writing of the book. And that's where I focused. I said, within those 4 months, I'll have my first draft. That was how I thought of it. So that was part of my 4-year situation. But I've often said after this turned out to be one of the most enriching professional experiences I've had. Loved it. Absolutely loved it.
It is a fun process, isn't it?
I know. Yes. For me, it stayed fun because in the moments where you're in, under the wave, the water is coming, and you're like, oh my God, I don't see anywhere. None of this is good. I don't know where it's going. No one's going to find any value in any of this. When you're there are others saying, yep, been there, stick with it, keep going, or change your mindset, try something else instead, leave all this, go do something else, whatever. People would normalize it, help you tolerate that phase and allow you to stay, as opposed to potentially just dropping out, right?
Right. Yeah. And I like how you said that you got to normalize that imposter syndrome, because it's something that we all go through. We all deal with it, and we'll go through it at many different times too. One day you're super confident and the next you're not. And then the next day you're like, I don't know what I was thinking yesterday. But yeah, you got to stay resilient.
You gotta stay resilient, and part of resilience often involves community. There are other aspects, like you do want to take care of your overall health through whatever you need: exercise, meditation, eating, nutritious nutritious food. It helps the brain. Seriously, it does. So there's a number of things, but definitely community was key for me.
It is, because writing it in itself is a lonely profession, especially if you're a full-time writer and you're just writing from home. And you may have that community online and things like that, but it's still not the same as like the socialization of it. So it is great to have like such a wide range of people to help you throughout that book. And I want to piggyback off of something you said earlier. You said that you gave yourself about 4 months to write the first draft. What other deadlines did you give yourself during the writing process?
Well, during those 4 months, there were specific times of writing. So I made it a rule. And I had done the math also, that literally I had to show up. I could not show up. I could not let something else take the space that was protected. And the space was protected daily, and sometimes more than once a day, sometimes longer stretches, regular small stretches, all that. That's probably, well, that's okay. So that's during those 4 months. The other deadline I gave myself was, prior to all this, I considered taking this workshop actually 6 months sooner initially. And then I started looking at my schedule, which would have been in the fall as opposed to the January session. And in the professional speaking world, both fall and spring are busy, but between the two, fall is even busier than spring. And it was also getting booked sooner because we were closer to it. So that's one of the deadlines where I said, okay, I was hoping to join this cohort. I can't. I'm going to join the next one, hold a bit longer, but have the availability. That was one. And then the other thing then was, after all this was done, had my publisher, then we set up the publication date, which was in the end had to be practically a year later, which for me was like, oh my, a year later, that's so long. So for a moment, but there were all kinds of good reasons for it. And I understood them and supported them still, even though, if I could do magic, would I have said 6 months? Absolutely. But it had to be that. But once I got over the fact that it was a year later, I thought, okay, now we have a year. So we're not going to sit. We're going to be having conversations. We're going to be out there. We're going to be talking about this. We're going to be preparing the baby as much as as much as anyone could. So then I started learning about this. Okay, how does one do this? And yes, the publisher helps in some ways, but still, as the author, people had told me this, but it's very true. You have to lead it. And that's another place where, therefore, I set up a number of things for this period of time. I started thinking about, launch date. What do I want? Where do I want it? And that time turned out to be super well used. And I actually enjoyed it. Again, it was not just work to get the baby out. It was, let's support that phase as well.
Now, I realize that during this conversation, I feel like I'm just gushing about everything that you're saying, but I'm utterly fascinated at the way that you worked through your book, because when you started your book, you got that community, and then when you realized that your book wasn't going to come out when you wanted to, and you had this year-long gap, you figured, well, let me learn about marketing and let's talk about it, and you had that confidence boost. And oh my gosh, you're making me think of so many things that I'm not doing, but it makes sense, and it's great that during that year, you're not supposed to sit. When you have a book, you're supposed to be talking about your book while you're writing it and while you're waiting for it to publish, and you're supposed to be doing a lot of things behind the scenes, and it's a lot to juggle. And the fact that you gave yourself those deadlines and you knew what you were going to do every single day, and you told yourself, this is another job for me. I'm going to do this. Nothing else can get in the way. That is a huge, huge commitment. And wow, I am super impressed.
Well, it I know it sounds perhaps good in that sense. It was work, and it was also very demanding. One of the things you just mentioned now, how you're encouraged to talk about it while you're writing it. I was so not wanting to do this. I was so not. It felt like I had to protect my little seed in the ground, and that if I talked about it, I'd be like opening the ground and the seed would never grow. And it felt like I had to protect the thing. And in nonfiction, if you're going to propose in your book certain activities, that kind of thing, it's a good idea to. I learned, I did not know that prior. It makes sense and all, but to do focus groups, right? To test some of your ideas, that kind of thing. And so early in the writing, again, my developmental editor was encouraging me to do this. And initially I was, no, I don't need to do this. I will be fine without it. I already have great feedback from people I've worked with. So yeah, not needed. And gently, you know, she would remind me, or others in the community would do theirs and learn so much above and beyond what they knew, the whole thing. So in the end, I pushed myself, very much pushed myself. I had zero excitement about doing it. I was only like pushing myself to do it because everyone was saying it's a good idea to do it. And of course, yes, it went great. I learned from it. It was useful. All the things people people were saying. But it's I had to very much push myself there. Here's another place where I pushed myself is differently, but as I was getting ready for launch, everyone was saying just don't pack your schedule as much month prior, month during, month after. And I was thinking, "I- how can it how complicated can this be? The book is written, there is a launch date, there's a few events around the launch date, really. But again, I listened because I was thinking I joined this community to make sure I would, be open minded, realize I know nothing about any of this. So let's listen. And so, again, reluctantly, because I already had to push things aside for a number of months just to get the book written. And so I still did it. And what a great idea. Yeah, there were a number of things that came in because of the book. There are a few things that had to be there because they are important parts of what I do, commitment to keynotes, that kind of thing. And had I not protected the time during, prior, and after, it would have been too much for sure. Like it would have been very, very tiring and demanding, which probably would have meant I need to take a break, say a couple of months after, where the book is now getting attention and you want to be there for that. But also, I would not have enjoyed the moment as much, and uh, and I did, and it was great. So yes, it sounds good and all. It mostly is because I forced myself to listen and to implement as many recommendations as I could from what I was learning.
It's true. I mean, it's not easy to talk about your work or to market or to do anything outside of your comfort zone. It doesn't matter if it's with work or whatever, but it's it's a huge step for you to go out of your comfort zone and try something new. And I can probably guess that if you wrote another book, you would have no problem doing those other things again, right? Because now that you've had the experience and you know what they're like, you'd be able to do it no problem.
Yes, I mean, yes, you learn, right? Now, I do not plan to write another one, and that probably is it for me, because I mean, I do have all these other things I want to do more of that, some of which I pushed aside, some of which are now needing more of my attention, and I'm excited to do as well. So for me, that's probably it. But definitely learned a lot.
Well, that's cool. Even if you don't plan on writing another book, it's so nice to have this experience.
Yes,
You know, you
yes.
can say that you did it and it was great and it was fun. That's awesome.
Yes. Yeah, very much. I truly enjoyed the journey, but I think it's in part because I made space for it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Now, the what you discuss in your book, did you have to implement any of those strategies for yourself during this time?
Oh, yes, yes. Well, I better if I'm, see if I'm going to uh, share with people all this research-based information combined with my practical experience, both from psychology and business, um, and be in these demanding phases myself, where my context, my demands were shifting, at least because of the book and other reasons as well. Yes, I absolutely implemented what I share in the book, because what I'm saying in the book is, okay, we have information about ways to become even more resilient. That's great. We all know exercise, eat well, and have good boundaries, time in nature. They're all true and research based. The problem is not in knowing, it's in implementing. Lives are full. We would love to have all these things, but they just don't make their ways into our lives as much as we would like or we would benefit from. And so what I do in the book is I say, yes, all this from psychology, and we need to bring strategy from business. So strategy being looking at the idea we have, the context that's here, and how we're going to land this idea, how we're going to get to bringing an idea to market or implementing. And so similarly here, I'm just translating some of these tools for us. So for example, and we'll share, if you want, worksheets that are coming from the book. They're on my website. You don't need to have the book. You can just use the sheets. But the guide, the exercise of taking a moment to revisit your values, okay? A moment to clarify for yourself where currently in your context, your sources of demands, all of them, positive, negative, work, personal, everything, where are they now? What are your sources of supply? What brings you energy? And there's one more exercise that looks at the details of your context, and then designing your strategy. So for me, for example, when I was a few months prior to launch, people were telling me protect the time. And I was thinking, well, do I really need to do this? But I was looking at my values of wanting to always be open to learning, of valuing health, of valuing community, whatever. Okay, number of values there. Looking at the demands, how busy the fall was going to be, how everyone was telling me the launch would be, and a number of other things, and then other aspects of my context. Basically, my strategy became have extremely solid boundaries more than ever right now, at least for the next 6 months, so that it's right now and the 3 months around the launch. So that was one of my strategic pillars, protect the boundaries. Another strategic pillar was invest with even more consistency in my physical health now so that I can front load in some ways, knowing that more demands were present now and coming. And I don't remember what my third one was, but that's how I was in this case using exactly what I'm talking about in the book. Yes.
It's so cool to see that parallel and to see it in action with not only just, whatever your readers go through and what they get out of the book, but also for yourself too. It's like, oh, look at me. I practice what I preach and it works. I know you have the schooling to back it up, but how much research did you have to do for this book?
As a researcher, you just enjoy reading academic research. Like, I have to put boundaries around reading research because I have to do other things. It's like, so I know, right? That's true. Mean it. And so, literally, when I get new articles, it feels like, oh my God, it's like a bag of candy or something. Oh, which one to read first? And how do the ideas combine together? And so Yeah, so I like it, and I read a very interdisciplinary research in general because of the work I do, and so it's always there. And then in moments where I feel like additional research may needed, I may go search for it. Sometimes, most of the time, it's I have read it, but I don't like keep a record of everything I'm reading, so I don't remember where I read it. So sometimes the research was not so much about finding a new idea or something like this. It was more tracking it back. Like, where was this thing that I read that I want to verify before I write this or that kind of thing. So it's very, for me, it just is I think it became part of how I work so early and for so long in school that it just stayed. It's in now.
You just love that learning curve.
I do. Yeah.
Which is great. I mean, learning is such an amazing thing. How could you tell like credible sources from non-credible sources? Because I feel like that's something that, I mean, again, most of our audience, they're all fiction writers, but we still have to research, and it gets to this fine line between like, reality and the fiction. But how do you find credible resources?
For me, being sort of in my fields and knowing them, it's similar to if I read something on chat gpt, for example, I can use chat gpt in my area because I know the research already. And so if it says something completely aligned, that's great. If it says something that's missing a key piece, I'll know it immediately because I know the research. So it's so as someone in the field, you get to know what academic journals are the most reputable, have the most peer-reviewed process, that are most stringent, that have an acceptance rate that's lower, that have solid boards that and review process. So you get to know which of these journals are those most peer-reviewed. And also, and even then, right, even if you have very solid journals, you want your own critical thinking on it. And because, that's what an academic article does. They talk about their piece of research and how they came to their conclusion. And then you have your overlaying your own evaluation of, is this type of research design something that is fairly solid, or it's very exploratory, so you know how to nuance how you're positioning the writing. Sorry, I'm getting into the details now. But ultimately, in the research conversation, what gets us towards more confidence in knowledge is the replication process, right? You've got a research doing this, you've got more research doing different but slightly similar questions, and then it just gets to a point where we've got enough knowledge to know that yes, 5 times a week, half hour of exercise will increase your overall mood. Okay, so now we have that confidence. So that's that. So it's a great question, because if you said, MH, you have to write a book that will involve civil engineering information, how do you know that that research is solid? I do not. Like, if I went to chat gpt and asked something, it would probably tell me something that I think sounds great, how to build a bridge, whatever. I think what I would do is go to a subject matter expert that may be a bit too intense and sort of my approach to it, but I probably would go to someone who is in that field. And I would say, okay, I'm just wanting to confirm a few pieces of information. Are you able to confirm or share with me which research or whatever? Like, you'd have to maybe pay even a consultant. Because otherwise, how would you know? I don't know how you would. If, like I said, if I don't know civil engineering and I'm hoping to find valid, reliable sources, I don't know enough to know what's valid or not.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think that's where that community comes in too, because you have such a wide writing community that you could very easily just shoot out a message to all of them and be like, hey, does anybody have any contacts for civil engineers?
Right?
And it's just that whole networking piece. So that, I mean, that's a good point. You definitely need to talk to people because it adds so much, and it's more personable too.
Yes, that. Yeah. And I would probably talk to more than one source. So, I mean, the same way that we would be reading more than one piece of research, you would be reading, a body of research so that you can get to a point where you have some understanding. But yeah, no, I think it's that piece from fiction writers that I learned as I was in my community interacting with them. I was fascinated. Like, most people don't know, unless you're an author or interacting with fiction authors, people don't realize the amount, I don't think, realize the amount of research that fiction writers are putting in their work. Like you read these books and you're like, oh yeah, but no, really, the amount of research is so significant. And yeah, I think we don't realize that until we're closer to it.
No, not unless you've experienced it. You don't realize it. Like readers in general, if you're not a writer, they have no idea what went into creating that book. They didn't see all the previous drafts. They didn't see the tears that went into it. What do you hope that your readers gain from your book?
I hope that more people decide to think strategically about their resilience, to talk more strategically about it, so it's for themselves and others around, and yes, plan more strategically. Because if we do that, we have such a great opportunity to be proactive and to change the course of how things are going to go as we do all the fabulously demanding things. Some of them not so fabulous. We may not want to have these demands, but they're there. That's part of life. And so the more we've been strategic about building the resilience, as opposed to just assuming we are or assuming it will be whatever it is. No, no, no. Let's take an active role in planning. That's what I'm hoping more people do.
And I think that's great. I'm a planner myself, but I don't plan things as like strategically as you explain in your book. And I really hope to take what I learned from your book and use it in practice. Now, since most of our audience are fiction writers, and now you kind of already answered this question, I guess, if our listeners want to take a page out of your book, no pun intended. But since for fiction writers, since it can be a lonely profession, how beneficial is the resilience plan for them?
Oh, critical, critical, I would say. Um, It's it's critical, e even more so if we're a bit more, by definition, isolated in a lot of the work we do. In if nothing else, just the fact that we know from research, if there were 4 things we did to increase our overall resilience, so our ability to go through adversity and come out even stronger, if there were 4, connections, human connections would be one of them. And we know that from research, like there are 4, yes, exercise, nutrition, sleep, and relationships. So the more our work is isolating, the more, and that's also valid for all of us, because the more we're going to work with AI, the more there will be moments for some of us where we will be alone with AI, not interacting with humans. And and that is also a reason to make sure we deliberately invest in social interactions with humans. We need that. So that's just one angle. I would say that, as fiction writers, you're going through these phases, right? You're going through different phases of this book, and if you write many books, you'll go through them again. And so they don't all look exactly the same. There are different contexts for each of those phases, the more intensely writing phase and other ones. And so what makes having a plan so helpful is that a strategic resilience plan, is that it's going to take every parts of your context into account. If, for example, there is a phase where you're writing from your home office and you're going to, I don't know, go and live with your parents for 3 weeks or go on vacation somewhere for an extended period of time, you'll need a different plan for that context because it will be a different one. And so your goal stays the same, writing, but my context has changed. So how do I, in this context, make sure I invest proactively in my resilience? Because if we're more resilient, of course, there are all the basic psychological health benefits of doing this, our ability to go through adversity. But specifically, if we're being creative in what we do, we need brain space. It's going to be very hard to be inspired and progressing with your writing if your resilience is very low, if you've been so taxed that your levels of energy are low and you're barely able to do the minimum things you need to do, right? So investing in this resilience is almost investing in bringing your best, bringing your performance to the best it can be, your creativity to the best it can be. And so from a professional perspective, you want it. You want it from your health, but you want it from your professional perspective as well.
That was a really good answer. I don't even have anything to add to that because you said that so well and it all made sense. And I mean, it's true when, as we were talking about earlier, writing a book is such a huge commitment and you do need to kind of find that balance between everything else going on in life and then wanting to write your book. And you kind of need to figure out, is this just a creative passion for me? Or is this something that I really want to pursue? And I think having that resilience plan can open your eyes to so many different, it'll just give you like this brand new perspective on your projects.
Yes, and then you'll have it for the rest of your life, right? There will be other phases, other things, and it's a similar approach that we just need to update it. And it does not take long. It's not none of these exercises are long. They're 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I think the longest is 15. So very reasonable. And if you have a longer flight from one, a few hours flight from one part of the planet to the next, or even from one part of the continent to the other, you probably have time to read it.
Oh yeah, it's one of those things where it's like once you have the tools, you can do it. You know what to do and you can keep doing it and keep it updated as you said. That's great. Well, MH, it has absolutely been a huge pleasure. I've enjoyed this conversation a lot and I have loved having you on the show. So before we go, please let our listeners know where they can find you and your work and just tell them a little bit about yourself.
Yes, yes. Well, and thank you to you, Rachel. It's interesting, right? Even this conversation for me helped me realize some things that I just went through and did not actually realize. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, no, mean it. Okay, places to find me. So theresilienceplan.com will get you to everything I do, including the book. So that's one place. And we'll probably have those things in the show notes as well. And LinkedIn, always good. So Dr. M.H. Pelletier, you'll find me there. And I tend to post different tips, practical applications, great articles. So if you find that's part of sometimes that's part of community, right? Community is, you may have the people close to you, like you mentioned, you have your sister, for example, but we'll have the closer friends. We may have an online community, and then we may have our social media connections that are reminding us of certain things. And then if we add our voice, then we're contributing to it. So you can see it as part of your community. So there you go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Again, it's been a pleasure talking to you. And of course, all of MH's links will be in the description below and in the show notes. So please do go check out her work. Now, before we leave, if you want to learn more about us and the podcast and even opportunities to be a guest on the show, don't forget to check out our website at themerrywriterpodcast.podbean.com. In the meantime, we will turn it over to you guys. Please feel free to give MH a shout out in the comments and let her know your thoughts on her work. Remember, we release a new episode every Wednesday. Next week, we're discussing book covers. So to ensure you don't miss it, hit the subscribe button on your way out. As always, thanks for listening to the Merry Writer Podcast. We'll see you next week. This podcast is brought to you by Scraps of Paper. We have notes everywhere. The music titled Inspired is by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons 4.0.